Thank you for tuning in to TalkWad.com, the world's fastest growing internet radio network. Please check out all the other great shows on www.talkwad.com.
Today I don't feel like doing anything. I just wanna lay in my bed. Don't feel like picking up my phone, so leave a message at the tone. 'Cause today I swear I'm not doing anything.
Gentle loving hugs, and thanks for turning in to the Fibro Friends radio show here on healthinforadio.com, part of the Entertainment Global Media Network, broadcasting out of heavenly Clearwater, Florida. If you feel like doing nothing at all today, then just sit back or lie down. We're here to educate you with a full spectrum of information on fibro, advocate on the behalf of all fibro friends for fibro awareness and the need for more research, and support each other with laughter and love. New to fibro? Wonder what it is? Fibromyalgia is a complex chronic disorder involving a malfunction in how the brain processes pain, which leads to other multiple dysfunctions in the body. Some of the main symptoms of fibro are pain and fatigue, sleep disorder, memory and concentration, depression, digestive disorders, hypersensitivity. So today, you've tuned into Fibro Friends. So please welcome your host, Laura Rosa.
Hi, I'm Laura Rosa, and welcome to another show of Fibro Friends. Tonight we have a very special guest, one all the way from Australia, and I'm very proud and excited to have him on my show. His name is Dan Neifer, He's from Australia. So welcome, Dan. Can you hear me?
I can. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
See, I'm cheating. I can see him on Skype, and I'm trying to give him a link so he can see as well. I don't even know how to begin this show. I will start by saying that he is an author of an ebook that's recently come out called CFS Unraveled, and it has a longer title. He is a former fibromyalgia /CFS /ME / a few other recovered person who had suffered through this illness, as all of us do. And he is going to share with us what he has done and all of the effort he took to research and figure it out, the cure for fibromyalgia. Yes, you heard me.
Yes, well, thank you very much for having me on your show to share my message of hope.
It's my honor.
And also to share a little bit about what I learned. And look, I probably would like to start off, Laura, by saying that I probably don't feel 100% comfortable with the word, and I'll tell you why.
That's okay.
Because the word cure actually kind of suggests that there's a single treatment that we can just use.
Correct.
And that treatment is basically going to fix everything up, and then you will be well again. And really, I think most people who've had fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, will basically find that that nothing like that exists, and they probably will have an experience similar to me, where you try 1,000,001 things.
Correct. I understand. Tim, in the way I read your book, though, I hear if I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I mean, it's a lot of work, but you've given me a doorway where I have hope and possibility, and you've put in a lot of the chemistry of why it makes sense, that I do believe that I can heal from this disorder, or I have the opportunity if I can put all these things in order. Would that be safe?
Yeah, no, and that's really so spot on. You know, it's really nice that you got the message of the book, Laura.
Oh, yes.
That's what I'm really trying to do. Is I'm trying to make sure that people see hope. And in the book, I offer two things. I guess the first part really talks about offering a framework, so that people are understand what they can do to move towards recovery. But in order to qualify that framework, I first of all outline a hypothesis or an explanation of what I believe actually causes this illness.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, it's sort of a strange position to be in. I didn't really think I would necessarily ever write such a book.
I'm
But to
sure
be
you
honest,
didn't. About 10 years ago, you were busy in a whole nother world doing your thing, and life was going along just fine, if I understand your background.
That's exactly right. You know, I was busy, working, and I just we started a new family. We had a bit of a rough trot when my son was born. My wife nearly passed away.
Oh my gosh.
And then, you know, everything had sort of, it was kind of a crazy year. And about a year afterwards, or it could have been even a little longer, we basically, everything was fine again. You know, life was back to normal. And I was working very hard at work. I was exercising very intensely, I suppose. And
Right.
I actually went to get an immunization, because someone had chickenpox in the office, and I didn't want to bring it home to the family.
Especially to a new baby.
Yeah, exactly. You know, especially because we had some dramas. You know, you just want to make sure that you stay away from trouble. Ironically, I wanted to make sure that everyone would be well, and I took this immunization, and about, you know, maybe 4-5 days afterwards, I was walking along at lunchtime with my colleagues. We always went for lunchtime walks, and I just couldn't keep up. It's like my legs just weren't working, and it's kind of strange, you know, when you've always been a well person, and I couldn't even kind of really understand what was going on. It was kind of an odd experience, and then basically, sort of, you know, just kind of ignored it. But it happened again when I was on a walk with the pram with my wife, and I really got to a point where I felt like I couldn't take another step. It was quite kind of peculiar.
Was it
And then
painful?
very shortly afterwards, all the illness started. I started getting like a fever. It sort of felt like a flu, you know.
Correct. Okay.
Felt like a flu, and I felt awful. But except the flu didn't go away, and you know, I didn't have like the you know, like a sinus infection. You know, normally when you get a flu, when you have a cold, you
Right.
have a runny nose and all that. I didn't have any of that. So I went to the doctor, and basically the doctor thought I had a throat infection, and he gave me antibiotics and painkillers, because he said he'd never seen such a bad throat infection. But the funny thing was, I didn't actually have any pain in my throat.
I recall that in the book. Yes.
Yes.
I thought that was a bit odd. And he's actually giving you prescription medication for pain, and you're not
Yes.
even complaining about it.
Yes.
Okay.
Look, and then basically from there, unfortunately, it all went downhill. It all went downhill.
Everything else started to come up and show up, and
Yeah.
till you became basically disabled.
Yeah. Look.
I know this is hard for you.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, like even after all these years of being well, it still evokes a little bit of emotion. And
Of course. It's
you
huge.
know, like when you're so ill for so long, it does get very difficult. And
Yeah.
and the thing is, you know, you really do lose hope. I mean, you know, the fatigue, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And of course, nobody can really understand what you're going through, because normal people get tired or fatigued, and they go, well, you know,
Right.
they try and give you all the hints, but the hints are meaningless because you're in a whole new frame of reference. You know what I mean? I'm sure you do know what
There's
you mean
not
if you
words
suffered it.
to explain it to a healthy person. They have no
That's
reference point.
Right. And it's not just the fatigue, you know. It's
Nope.
it's everything else. I mean, it's like there were so many different symptoms.
Yeah.
I felt almost embarrassed going to the doctor because I felt like a hypochondriac. I couldn't help but feel like you go to tell them and you feel like you're making up the symptoms because, I mean, there's so many, and some of them are just downright bizarre.
Yeah,
Downright bizarre.
until you get that rapport of trust with the doctor and they do believe you. That's
Yes.
been the case for so many people that I've talked to through my group. They kept being referred to a psychiatrist, because they thought they were looking for attention.
Yeah, oh God.
Yeah, the last thing we want.
Sorry, but yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people then get told that it's depression or something like that, but
Yeah.
This
Which
is a
is-
real fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome are very real physical illness, and obviously some people sort of make out like it's all in your head, or people are depressed or something like that. I mean, they may be depressed, but
That is a factor.
yeah, well, I mean, it's
But
pretty
it's
depressing
more than
to be
that.
so ill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a physical illness, and I guess what happened from there is my symptoms would sort of come and go. So it kept coming in bouts every so many months, and there was always a pattern. You'd get the fever, or sometimes I get a rash, and then the throat glands, and then you'd be stuck in bed for a few days, and I tried to manage it. I was then reduced my hours to part-time. And then eventually there were periods of time where I couldn't work at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pain started. And the funny thing about pain is, as a Aussie bloke, we try and always be tough. And
Sure.
frankly, I found the pain in a way early on. It was much easier to ignore. Okay, so it hurts and I was in pain, but it just didn't bother me too much. The fatigue was difficult to ignore because when you feel like you can't speak and somebody says something and you get angry because they're making you say something, which is completely unreasonable. But when you're that fatigued that it takes so much effort. In fact, sometimes I found it was harder to say something than even to stand up and go out of the room.
Right.
But the pain, what I found with the pain is over the years, the pain actually started to wear me down.
Yeah, I
So
understand
at first, I was very like, oh well, this is just take it in my stride. But then I'm not sure how long exactly it was. I'm not sure if there's a day that this happens, but there
Right.
came a point where I found the pain was just my threshold was just totally diminished.
Yeah. And I'm sure you had sleep issues as well.
Oh yes, sleep issues. It's in the morning impossible to get out of bed. And I'm not saying I was sleeping, but it's like I was semi-conscious and I
Right.
could not move.
I-
And then you think, okay, I'm going to go and have a good sleep, but at night, suddenly you're awake and you're restless and you feel literally very restless and twitchy and you just can't get to sleep. And sometimes I'd be up till all hours of the night. And then my wife, of course, would say, well, of course you're tired, you need to go to sleep at night. And which is logical and fully correct, but unfortunately with this illness, that doesn't work. And, there's reasons for that. And I explain that in the book.
Yes.
But at the time, of course, I didn't know. And I went to so many doctors.
Did you have a sleep study?
Sorry, what was that?
Did you have a sleep study?
No, I didn't have a sleep study, but I went to lots and lots of doctors, and inevitably, so you sort of get to a certain point, and some doctors were very kind, and they would try and really help, and they would do all these investigations and try and work out what it was, but in the end, you sort of get to a point where they go, well, I don't know,
Yeah.
and I was actually ill for several years before I finally was told that I have chronic fatigue syndrome. So it seems that actually getting a diagnosis is not an easy thing. And I didn't know about chronic fatigue syndrome. I actually sort of had some sort of a virus.
All those years, and you couldn't understand why.
And I was kind of concerned that maybe my family could catch it or something.
Sure.
Or I thought maybe there's something wrong with the house.
Right.
You hear about these things about toxic house syndrome.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's kind of a scary thing when you don't know why you're sick.
Of course it is. And it takes some people 5 and 10 years to get a diagnosis. And it's almost a relief, even though it's not a great diagnosis. But at least you understand what you're up against.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny. I remember shortly after I learned that I had chronic fatigue syndrome, I actually went on the internet and I googled and I remember distinctly a gentleman who I've actually, funny enough, like all these years later, actually met now and spoken to. His name is Court Johnson. He started Phoenix Rising, and I read he had this article about himself where he explained his life story and everything like that. And I remember just looking at it and going, oh my God, this is like me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was such a relief finding out I'm not the only person that had these crazy symptoms.
Yeah.
But Laura, my illness actually got worse, unfortunately. And
You got mad too.
sorry, what was that?
You got mad. Keep
Yeah,
going.
well, I
I'm
wasn't
jumping the
very
gun.
happy.
No, you weren't happy.
I wasn't very happy, but I guess, you know, I'd actually given up on the possibility of recovery.
This was the way life is going to be.
Yeah, well, that's right. And I figured, you know, my best strategy was to try and just live with it the best I could, because I basically felt something was broken in me. Something is just broken and it can't be fixed. And I thought no one knows what to do. You know, everything you read on the internet is all about how people have tried for years to get better and it's never worked. And it's also negative. And I'd never met anyone else, you know, who'd said that they could recover it. So
Right.
basically thought the most sensible thing for me is just to try and live with it. And I actually did that for a time, not completely unsuccessfully, because, you know, you change your expectations
Yep.
and mentally make a shift so it's not as upsetting when you're sick, or it's not as upsetting when you can't do things. And so actually giving up in a way was comforting, because now I didn't feel I had the pressure of running around and keep trying to, you know, find a cure or something. You know what I mean?
Right. It didn't exist. These are your limitations, and you were comfortable with, I'm going to live this way. And so,
Exactly. So it's like I thought, okay, well, I can sort of manage it. Okay, there's times where it's very difficult, but you sort of learn to do things differently in your lifestyle so that the symptoms are not as bad or not so bad that often, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
And so that kind of worked to an extent. And also I was so sick of people telling me, here's the cause, and, you know, like everyone seems to have like some idea and have some treatment that they can then give you and say, oh, well, you know, because after I went to all the doctors and the doctors couldn't help me, and I went to lots of doctors, I then went to like all the other alternative health practitioners, and everyone had like, oh, well, it's candida, or it's parasites, or it's this, and I went through all these treatments, and besides wasting huge amounts of money,
Right.
which I didn't have, it's just like the emotional roller coaster of trying it, then it doesn't work. It was gut wrenching.
Yeah.
But
I relate.
what was the turning point for me, Laura, was actually when things got a whole lot worse. And that was at Christmas time. We just moved house, and the strain of moving house basically made me bedridden again. But this time, it got almost scary. Well, no, it got scary. It got scary sick, and then when I finally managed to sort of get out of bed and at least be sitting in the lounge and things, we had Christmas on, and you know, I couldn't even fake being happy or half okay for the kids. And I think anyone who's a parent recognizes that for something like Christmas, unless you've got like an arm sort of cut off
Right.
and your blood pulsing out of it, we find a way of just gritting our teeth and
Of
doing the
course.
best we can.
It's so special for them, and you love them so much, but there was nothing
Exactly.
left inside of you.
That's right. And you know, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And that was the turning point for me, because I suddenly felt that it wasn't okay to live with it. And I recognized that things could get worse. So, you know, when I said I was going to manage just to live with it, that was while things were going not good, but I felt I could manage it. And suddenly I felt like I can't manage this. And I think it was it was just after New Year, so a little over a week later, when I managed to sort of crawl out of bed, and I went to the study, still in my pajamas, and
Good for you.
I suddenly had this thought that, you know what, I'm going to find out what causes this. and it seemed a bit ridiculous because I don't have a medical background.
No, but what is your background in?
Well, I do have a science background.
Very strong science, yes.
Yeah, I actually worked as a physicist.
Yes, so you're not...
Specializing in quantum
You
physics
got
and
the ability, I would say, to know how to start. You know, you're no dummy.
yeah.
So you've got the
It's
IQ.
like the logical, the scientific training to follow logic is what I had on my side.
Which I think is actually better because that's maybe a little different than the way medicine would approach it. So you got to approach it from your point of view as a physicist. And I think that was probably made it easier in some ways versus somebody who has an MD. Just an opinion. You can
Well,
see it
it's
different.
interesting you say that because I have actually spoken to medical researchers later on or in recent times. And what I have found is that most medical researchers will have an area of, that they specialize in.
Sure.
So it might be immunology, and then they'll look at CFS, and they'll see there's an immune dysfunction. And so they'll investigate what is going on with white blood cells, with killer cells, what is the dysfunction here, and they find something.
Right.
And then they say, okay, well, here we can see that in fibromyalgia patients there's this dysfunction. This could explain a lot. Maybe this is what causes it. But then you have other people who are experts in viruses, and they go through the same thing. And so everyone who's in their specialty, they look at it from their own point of view. Whereas me, my background was in physics, and then I worked in the technical services industry as a technical specialist. So quite a change in careers, but still sort of a technical person. And basically my focus was to find out what is actually going on with the illness. So I looked at it as a broad overview of everything, like what are all these bizarre symptoms, why does, I bet the way your fibromyalgia started is completely different than mine. And
Sure.
Everyone's got a different way to get it. And then you hear people who get over it, like with different things. I hear one person says, oh, well, there's a detox problem, and which is true. We do have detox problems, and we have toxic problems often.
Sure.
And they go, well, I did this great detox program, and I did this, and I recovered. And then, so they think then that it's that what is the cause, and everyone's got these different things. I go, well, how can all this make sense?
There's
how can all this be explained?
too many variables.
Too many variables, and I wanted to try and find an explanation that basically tied all these variables together, and that sort of explained why people get it in different ways, why people recover in different ways, why we have different symptoms, and how on earth can so many symptoms really be created in one illness.
So that's a big bucket to carry. So
yeah,
you jumped into the libraries and did a lot of research?
That's right. I didn't want to read any more books about CFS because every time I read it, it basically told me that I have to treat everything, and then apparently I'm going to get better. And frankly, I tried that for years and it hadn't worked. So I kept thinking, no, I need to find out why this is happening.
What is the deep underlying cause?
That's right, because I felt if I treat everything, I mean, why is it happening in the first place? Like, why do I have to fix my hormones that are all out of whack? And why do I have to fix my gut? And why do I have to, fix my mineral balances? And why do I have to take all these supplements? I mean, yes, I appreciate all those things work, but I'm like, well, why is all this stuff wrong in the first place? And it was very difficult, Laura, because I don't have a medical background. And I have to tell you, my focus was reading physiology, and I was reading medical papers. So I looked at what are the things we have in common, because you find there's certain things in common, and some of the obscure facts. And I looked at trying to work out, well, what's causing that. And I actually started my research with cellular function, because obviously the fatigue was my first symptom, and I suppose my predominant symptom early on, especially. So I'm like, well, why are we low in magnesium, and what's magnesium used for? And I started on this sort of level, but it was really hard because you read like a sentence or like a bunch of a paragraph, and I'm like, I didn't understand what they were talking about because it was like a strange language.
It is.
And but eventually things started to piece together, and then I basically started to form a hypothesis of what was going on. And it was very complex, but it really seemed to make sense. But I suppose I was still somewhat lacking in confidence that this was right. And I started actually using that. I started actually a whole bunch of treatments for myself or strategies. And that took a little while to take hold. But the next thing that happened is once I started to have this picture in my mind of what is the cause, I actually then found other people who had suggested similar causes, or maybe not in the same way or as myself, but certainly I would say that essentially quite similar.
Okay.
Perhaps missing out some distinctions I think were important, or perhaps sometimes getting into some details that I felt perhaps were not helpful. But actually going back many decades in some cases.
The information.
Yes, that's right. So it was funny. At first I felt like, oh wow, I've discovered this amazing thing, and then I sort of went, oh, it looks like some people have discovered essentially what I'm talking about a long time ago. But I think the problem was that they were often misinterpreted, or
Okay.
or often I felt they didn't tie enough of the loose ends together.
They stopped too
happens is-
soon.
Yeah, and then people looked at it and they would sort of go, well, sort of sounds good, but how come this and this doesn't make sense, and therefore it can't be right. And so what I tried to do with the book, when I finally I ended up meeting people, with a lot of people suddenly with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, and I wanted to help them.
Right.
And I realized I couldn't just sort of explain it that easily in a quick conversation. So that's why I basically decided to write the book, because when I then actually got better, it was, I guess I always vouched for myself that if anything would ever happen and I could get better, that I wanted to basically tell someone else, because when I was sick, I really wish someone had come along and would have told me, you know. So,
Sorry.
yeah, so that's basically the journey of how the book came about.
And how much time did it take you to doing all your research and hypotheses? And I mean, because you put out a lot of information in this book. It's very in depth.
Well, Laura, it actually hasn't stopped, to be honest, because once I sort of had the hypothesis, I then felt I needed to go deeper in order to write the book. So
Because you wanted to be able to back up what your hypothesis was.
Well, that's right, but I didn't want to write a text that was a medical text, so I didn't want to actually reference the book to every dysfunction. Instead, I've just used what is commonly known, physiology,
Right.
and I added, I suppose, some parts to explain the hypothesis. But it's not like a medical reference text. And I tried to strike a balance in terms of what level to write the book, because I wanted people to be able to read the book, not doctors, but people who are unwell, because those are the people who need the information.
Correct.
The most, because the information has been in the medical community to a large extent for a long time, and I mean, I keep every other day I seem to be meeting some person who's written a book, decades ago, who basically said something similar to me, whether there be some neurologist or whoever. Often I actually find it's GPs who actually seem to make quite some breakthrough.
CP?
GPs.
The general practitioners. Okay.
Yeah, which is as opposed to specialists. And I think it's because they've got that close contact with patients that it drives them to deep
Yeah.
detail, you know?
But you seem to definitely connect the dots. For me, a lot of the terminology was somewhat familiar. I did not know nearly as much about our physiology. It is a book that was very well balanced, so that medical could, get the gist of it, and the common person, if they may not. I'm going to have to read it a couple times. I actually
Yes.
can't even really read a book. I fall asleep 3 to 5 pages, so I found I have a narrator on my computer, so I had it read to me like while I'm driving, so
Right.
but I do need to, and I did print out all you have at the end of the book. You have a lot of charts showing how the whole physiology works, so
Yes.
it really backs up when you get to how do you get into recovery, is it okay to go there? Just not, I'm not going
Yeah,
to share it all.
absolutely.
But
Look,
because that's what I think everybody's waiting. Okay, great. You put all your pieces together. What does that mean to me? So
yes,
I followed your instructions. I did not go back and watch any of your videos. I just went straight through the book.
yes,
I didn't, throughout the book, you would say you can stop here and click and you can get a printout so you can see more clearly what I'm talking about. I
yes,
didn't do that based on not having a printer with me, but at the end of the
sure,
book I did, and they
yes,
were amazing. But what I got made totally clear sense. This is not going to happen in a week. It's going to happen 6, 9, 12 months, depending on if you're newly diagnosed or newly symptomatic. It's going to be a little quicker because you don't have the secondary issues coming up because of the first underlying causes, like the adrenals. I'm in the secondary, I'm like, I was thinking about on the way here, since 2004, so about 9 years I've been
yeah,
living in a world of pain and unexplainable things, and my
yes.
metabolic system's totally whacked. So I'm
Yeah, Laura, good. It's a good point. Like, I mean, the secondary things. I think some of them may actually cause even a tertiary dysfunctions. But the point is, we got to be careful about time because um, you, you mustn't set sort of expectations that you're going to recover in a couple of weeks, because then you might get
never right.
disappointed and disheartened.
And that's another key point you make is you've got to do whatever you can to keep a really positive attitude
Yes, and
support.
for me, I guess this is part of the reason I wrote the book, because what I found is that you go to do something, but then you don't want to follow through because you think it's probably not going to work. So I figured, for me, I was completely convinced in the hypothesis.
In
Sorry,
theory.
I'm getting a bit of feedback here.
I can hear it.
I was completely convinced in the hypothesis, but sorry, I'm just I'm hearing myself talking louder than I can actually.
You're coming here
so I'm
fine.
just taking the headphone off here. So I was convinced before I got better. I don't want people to think it's a story of, oh, I got better, therefore they can get better. I feel in my book, if I hadn't recovered, and I have really recovered, I still feel that I would have still felt the hypothesis was solid.
It is.
And the other thing I guess I'd like to say that is recovery can also come fairly quickly. It doesn't have to take 6 months or 12 months.
There's
or
no
years.
time limit. It's all individually. It's an individual to each person and what disorders they're showing up with.
That's right. And I've seen
Right.
some people actually recover in quite surprisingly short periods of time.
You did mention that there's certain things you can do that you can start feeling a noticeable difference possibly within 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I've seen actually people recover from the illness, like as in
Back
be
to healthy,
completely
normal
symptom-free,
functioning. Wow.
in really quite short periods of times, which I was, I suppose, a little taken aback. And frankly, I think if I would have heard about this earlier, I probably would have just dismissed it. But having learned what I have learned, and some of the Harvard research that I've seen of late, it does make sense how it can happen.
That quickly.
How it can happen quicker.
Now,
Yes.
one thing you mentioned, because I'm going to, at least for those listening, let them understand that it's kind of broken down into what you eat, how you sleep, your exercise, and your stress level. I think are 4 big categories that all need to be attended to. I mean, each one has to play a part in this. You can't just
Yes.
fix one part of it and the rest will fall into place. So it's a lifestyle change through the recovery period. And
That's right, and this is critical. And look, people will have heard things like this before, because obviously doing all the right things is always going to help everyone in
Sure.
terms of eating right and sleeping and all this sort of thing. But it's a little deeper than that. And I think I'm probably going to have to give you, let the cat out of the bag, so to say, and
That's
share
fine.
what I call the cause, because your listeners are going to be really too annoyed or frustrated if I don't.
Right.
The problem with doing it is, and I've actually found this too with people who have read my book, if I look at the feedback, I have been really quite touched and overwhelmed by the amount of people who've emailed me and who, like you, say, wow, this really resonates, it really makes sense with my story and all my symptoms, and it explains things, and they feel like this is right. You know, intrinsic, and it ranges from people who have very little medical knowledge to people who have a lot of medical knowledge. But what I've also found is that some people react very negatively to my book, and a small proportion, but nonetheless a very vocal proportion.
Really?
In the community, and they usually don't contact me. They go public, and they run around in blogs and things like that. And I
what
feel like
could they possibly be jabbing at you? I don't
I
see
tell
the
you,
holes.
what happens is they will often not read the book very carefully, and so they'll first look at it and go, well, this is all stuff I've already heard, because, you know, I talk about diet and mitochondrial dysfunction and adrenals and hormones, and they've heard all this sort of thing
There's
before.
pieces.
So they go,
We've heard all the
they look at it,
pieces.
they don't make the connections because they don't read the book carefully.
And you said
So,
start it from the beginning and go
yes.
through it. Do not jump around. That's why there's no index at the beginning. And I followed your directions to the T.
Yeah,
And it was great.
it seems quite important, because otherwise you just go, well, I've heard all this before, but you're not making the connections. And it's the little distinctions which the lack of is causing this big mystery in the illness.
Right.
Because, so it's important that people read it very carefully. The second reason why some people, or the main reason why some people have gotten a bit excited or negative, because they think that I'm suggesting that this illness is in your mind, or that this
No,
illness
no,
is
no.
like I don't know, like malingering or something like this.
Then they didn't
and it's clearly not.
get the right
It's
message.
a real, very real physical illness.
Yes.
And in no way am I suggesting that people need a better attitude and are going to get better miraculously. I mean, for goodness sake, you know, I tried this a lot early on when I was able to have a good attitude, and it never worked. So it's not like that. What I'm suggesting is that this illness is a physical dysfunction.
Correct.
But it is a dysfunction in the autonomic nervous system.
The ANS, the big ANS,
right.
yes.
That is my view. Now, this isn't a proven hypothesis, and whilst there's many people who in the medical community who might agree with me, there'll be probably just as many or more who won't. So it's a difficult thing to prove, even though we have all the research to show that these dysfunctions occur.
Correct.
So let me tell you why.
Okay.
Because in fibromyalgia, first of all, you got to say fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. I mean, we're talking about something that sounds quite different. In fact, many people, especially in the United States, I've noticed, think that they're completely different illnesses.
That's correct. And we had a whole meeting on what's the difference. Their overlapping is at least 80%, but to me, they're the same thing. But
yeah, well, it's interesting because they overlap in all the weird and obscure symptoms, but the core symptom of fatigue or pain is different, and that's what divides the two groups. They get sometimes multiple chemical sensitivities, they get the brain fog, they get sensitivities to light and noise and all this type of thing, but the core symptoms are different. The other thing is, besides that, you find that one illness can often lead into the other. So people will start with pain, and then afterwards they get the fatigue sometimes, not necessarily, sometimes. And sometimes they start with fatigue, and then they end up getting the pain down the track. And often what I've found is that the multiple chemical sensitivities develop last.
interesting. Okay.
And I explain again how some of these things happen in the book and to make the connections. But I don't go into in exhaustive detail, because what I'm trying to do is give you enough information to convince the reader, and then so that they can feel confident in it, and then try and focus them on actual doing something to get better.
Yes.
And I really encourage people to re-engage with their doctors and re-engage with their naturopaths, and because people often go away from them and think, oh, well, they can't help me, but you must never stop taking drugs
Right.
without medical advice.
Right.
And you can get yourself into trouble. And people
Yes.
often have other illnesses too, not just
Yes.
CFS and fibromyalgia. So let me get back to the explanation.
Okay.
Basically, when we look at, here's the biggest clue, Laura. When I look at chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, the list of symptoms is as long as my arm, literally. Right?
Yep.
I have a list. It's literally, I'm putting it against my arm, it's literally as long as my arm. And the symptoms are so wide and varied that, frankly, if you and I had not the experience with the illness, we would probably have to admit, if we looked at someone telling us they had this, that we would wonder if they were hypochondriacs too.
That's
okay?
true. That would be a normal reaction.
So the way I see it is there's really only two possibilities. One possibility with someone who has all these this list is that they are crazy, that they're making it all up, right? Which obviously I hope we can put to bed that is not the case, right?
Yes, let's check that one
And
off.
the only obvious alternative is that it is the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is the part of the body that basically creates homeostasis. It controls all the other systems in the body. So it makes sure that your body is prepared to take action, to do things, and also to rest, to digest. It controls your heartbeat. It controls your involuntary breathing. It controls your digestion. It controls all the hormones. It controls pretty much everything, either directly or indirectly. It controls your everything from your urinary functions, your sexual functions. It is central to our body, and it is therefore in the central nervous system. And basically, what I'm suggesting is that this part of is not working correctly.
Clearly, yes.
So some people suggest, and this function basically, I'm trying to explain how this causes all the secondary problems and all the symptoms. Now, it can be hard to say, well, is that a symptom? Is it a secondary problem, this autonomic, or is it the thing that's causing it? So in the book, I make my case for why I believe it's the root cause. And some people have heard some things like this before, where some people have suggested, for instance, that the HPA axis is out of control. But this is really only looking at things from a limited point of view. And I think this is where I'm getting sometimes some of the negative feedback, because some of the people who've suggested that this HPA axis, that there's a overreaction of the sympathetic or the fight or flight
HPA. Go ahead and remind. I'm going to go through my chart here. What is HPA?
Yeah, HPA is the
hypothalamus.
Pituitary.
Okay, I got it. I remember. Fibro fog.
Yeah. So that is basically, that puts out your stress hormones.
And they're all connected. And that's, I remember you making the point that.
That's right. And so some people have suggested that people have an excessive fight or flight response, sometimes due to emotional issues. So there's been some authors who've written books like this, which I found later. And so then people think, oh, well, it's ridiculous for you to be saying that I have emotional issues and that's why I have all this sickness.
No.
Well, I'm not saying that is the case at all, but it could be the case. I mean, everyone is different.
Because you're saying that it can be triggered by an emotional or a physical stressor.
Absolutely. And in fact, often you find it's a combination.
Okay,
so
that makes sense.
Basically, the autonomic nervous system, when you have a stressful event, you get basically cortisol to produce more sugar in your body. It suppresses the immune system so that you don't have an overreaction if you have an injury. And this is because if you were chased by a lion or something that causes you to feel stressed out, then you're either going to have to fight, you're going to have to run, and you're probably going to get hurt. And so it basically creates a hormonal response and also a neural response. When you get excited. I think we've all experienced this, like if there's a gunshot.
Sure.
And that's basically how it responds. But what happens, in my view, with CFS and fibromyalgia is that people basically experience a period of excessive stress.
Yep.
A stress that in the end leads to the autonomic nervous system not knowing how to cope, and it starts dysfunctioning.
It's
And
like an
this stress-
overload.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Laura.
It's like an over. Are you saying it's like goes into overload?
Yeah, it's like going into overload, if you like. That's right. It's like a tipping point. It's suddenly, because what happens is the amount of stress response that the body has in the situation is not enough to cope with the problem, and it's actually starting to cause a problem in its own right. So it's like autoimmune disease, if you've ever heard of that. You know, when the immune system functions too strongly, it can cause problems. Well, basically what I'm saying is that this is starting to be so bad that it starts to cause problems, and it starts to then basically compensate for that by going to parasympathetic
The opposite.
domination. That's basically to relax and digest.
Right.
So we are going from one extreme to the other, with normal healthy people are in the middle. And what I was saying is the way it's triggered is basically through excessive stress. But this doesn't have to be from emotional reasons or stress as in I'm feeling stressed out. It can be from things like, and you will find this is the case, that people have like an accident. Like they can have, or they can be assaulted, or they can have a car accident, or they can have a surgery.
Sure, a major surgery or minor,
a major
I guess.
surgery,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't recover, or childbirth. In fact, often you find that when people have several successive childbirths, this can also be a trigger, and there's a couple of reasons for it. Because pregnancy also creates a certain hormone profile that actually depresses your immune system naturally, so that basically your immune system doesn't attack the fetus, and so that again causes a predisposition. And then you have the physical trauma of childbirth, and if you don't have enough time to recover, and you have like 3 babies in 3 years, sometimes people get triggered that way.
I read that. I was like that was an interesting one. That surprised me. So, but the people generally are predisposed for whatever gene, most likely,
Well,
or can
like,
anybody get this?
I think anybody can get this
Okay.
if they try hard enough.
If they try, which I gotta say, I was a single mom raising 4 kids, working a very high stress job, and I was quote healthy, and then I got in a car crash, but which only increased my stress because I had to work in pain, taking off time to see my doctors and still be a happy mom. So it doubled my stress, and all I did was get worse and worse till I finally went on disability, which causes its own bottle of stress. 4 years to wait to get approval, and it's just, and then I can't run my household. You don't have the energy, the stress, or the money. So yes, the disease itself causes its own stress. So,
this is such an important point you make, Laura. This is such an important point because it's not. And look at it. The reason why I was talking about something stress is because I just don't want people to think it's just an emotional thing. I mean, I've known people who, for instance, just had a toxic exposure. They've been in a house with mold.
Oh, I lived in a house with mold. Yeah, that was a stressor.
Or they've been exposed to pesticides. It can be a whole multitude of things. Anything that the body considers a stressor. So it's not a mental thing necessarily. But
it's a
basically,
lifestyle.
yeah, you're right. If the body then doesn't know how to react to stress, and remember, stress is normal and healthy.
Yes, there's
right?
good
We're all
stress.
supposed to have it, but the body doesn't know how to react to it, and does all these crazy things. But it's further exacerbated by this pertinent point you made: is that when you're sick, everything's so stressful, so it kind of feeds on itself.
Yep. Actually, you made that point in the book. I just
yeah. Oh well, there you go. So it's a very important point, yes, and but people, like I said, often think it's just a fight or flight or this or hormone thing. It's much wider than that. You've got to consider that there's a whole bunch of hormones, and often it's a nerve response. And in fact, once we start looking at the neurology of this in some detail, this starts to really give us a better explanation of what's happening with the fibromyalgia pain too.
For the pain, you say?
That's
for
right.
The pain. Yes, I've heard that. Come here.
So,
sorry.
Basically, there's many explanations or reasons people wonder why the pain is, and And I think it's important not to be sometimes too assertive or definitive that there's just one single factor. If I've learned anything from all my research, is that it's always a little bit more complicated than you might think looking at it at first glance. So there is issues obviously with the holding of tension in the body, which causes a severe strain, and
Yes.
we also end up having often dysfunction at a cellular level, which can then cause acid. So some people are suggesting that's why we have the pain. Then the second
The
thing
lactic
is, people
acid?
talk about- yeah, that's right. Because once your mitochondria is not functioning properly, once your cellular metabolism isn't working properly, and the Krebs cycle where your energy is created is breaking down, we start using what's called lactic acid fermentation, which is basically it's like, when you run too fast and you're sprinting, at the end your legs are really sore.
Yes.
That's the type of thing I'm talking about. So some people suggest that is the cause. Other people suggest the cause of the pain is inflammation.
Right.
Another person I've come across, which is a surgeon in Germany, he's actually suggests that when you look at the nerve gates, which are like, I don't know if you've ever noticed that the fibromyalgia pain, you know how it's got the trigger points?
Yes, that's the 11 out of 18 must be,
That's
it's
right.
one of our qualifiers.
I don't know if anyone's ever sort of wondered, well, why do we have trigger points as opposed to,
Yes.
why is this
Why
about
is
the
that?
points? And if you ever look at the actual acupressure or acupuncture points, you will find some interesting overlaps there.
Okay.
So there is one surgeon in Europe who basically says, well, there's these nerve gates, and then that there is fibrous tissue deposits, and this causes the pain. And he's actually performed surgery to remove this, and it's kind of people end up recovering. My question is, why is the fibrous tissue there?
Right.
And the answer is, again, it's due to too much stress. And the stress is not necessarily just caused by your experience, but by the autonomic nervous system not working correctly.
All those theories still work based on your theory of the root of the cause.
That's right. There's a lot of arguing in the community where some people say, it's detoxification. Some people say it's a sympathetic nervous system overreaction or fight or flight. Some people say it's things like methylation problems, hypermethylation. There's all these different theories, and they fight each other. What I'm actually saying is that you're not quite right because you're not seeing the big picture, but in a way, you are all right. You are all right. So stop fighting each other.
Just agree.
Because all these things are actually, occurring. It's not necessarily the cause, and so I think
the
it's important
effect.
that people work together.
They need to go one step backwards.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Look, sorry if I ever cut you off when you're talking. It's just my connection is not that good, and I don't hear you sometimes until late.
No, you're doing fine.
So I apologize for that. But coming back to the pain, so all of these things can be causing pain, and inflammation is another one, which is very dominant for a variety of reasons. Again, part of the ANS dysfunction causes inflammation. Cortisol is basically the anti-inflammatory. But the point is that the pain is pretty severe in fibromyalgia, and if you look at it, it doesn't seem to be quite commensurate with what seems to be physically going on when we've done investigations.
Correct.
And the reason is, I believe, with brain perception. So again, now when I'm talking about pain perception, I'm not talking about how tough you are or whether you have a high tolerance to pain because you are a macho person or something. I'm talking about what's going on in the brain, because the pain is very real, obviously.
Yes.
So when you look at the areas in the brain that basically are involved, there's some particular areas that you'll find light up if you do MRI studies.
Correct.
And one of those is the rostral anterior cingulate cortex. And this part of the brain, you'll see that under pain, especially in people with fibromyalgia, it lights up like a Christmas tree. And again, when we're looking at this dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, people often speak about one part of the brain called the amygdala.
Mm-hmm.
But the brain is so complex. you can't really narrow down to just one part. It is complex. There's also a lot of part of the autonomic nervous system that is balanced in the brainstem or in the pons, and there's a variety of nuclei here. I feel possibly the one that's most relevant is one called the locus coeruleus, which really talks about more. It really is more involved in how we balance between hormonal and nerve response in our body. So it starts to get very, very technical.
Yes, it does.
And then to some point, I suppose people can look at it as much as they like if they feel a need this in order to convince themselves. And there's plenty of research. There's wonderful medical researchers all over the world who do some great work. So you can Google it and find the papers if you like to make whatever connections you need to. I guess I would sort of just say sometimes it's perhaps better to take a step back and just say, let's not get too caught up in the detail.
Right.
Let's just recognize it isn't working.
Right.
So what can we do to fix it? And I guess
change that.
Yeah, to change that, and you see that the parts in the amygdala and is directly connected to these brain perception parts. So I believe that that's really what's going on.
Well,
so yeah,
I do have a question. When we say okay, I understand the philosophy, and I'm ready to move into the recovery stage. You make note to identify your triggers. Like, and I had to think about that. I don't know what my triggers are. I know if I stay up 2 or 3 nights in a row, that's a trigger because I couldn't sleep well. But how do you define your triggers?
This is a very, very important and very good question, Laura.
Well, thank you.
It is a little bit of a challenge, and I think this is why it's important that people engage to get some help.
Okay.
So, and it's important to read the book a couple of times because
yes.
I make some very, very important points about strategies you must consider, but often they'll only take up a paragraph. It is very difficult to write a book of such a wide scope and such a complex topic, and also one where people have such varying degrees of background knowledge in medicine.
Sure.
I wanted to make it for a layperson, but I wanted them to have enough information, to also be convinced. So, to answer your question, we had a look at. There's a number of triggers, and basically. Let me actually bring up a copy of it.
Okay.
Just so I can make sure I don't confuse people by using different wording. And basically, there's triggers that are physical. There's triggers that are, I suppose, what we might call mental triggers.
Sure. Okay.
And so a lot of these triggers are on a subconscious or on a conscious level. So it is not necessarily about just things we can do consciously, because if your blood sugar, for instance, were to drop.
That's okay. What causes that? Something we
well,
ate.
That is caused by the autonomic nervous system dysfunction.
Right. But it also is triggered then by a certain food then.
Well, yes. I mean, food
or not
affects,
food.
It's all very complex. You see, the body is designed to work. It's amazingly complex.
Yes, it is amazingly complex.
And what happens is, over time, you will find that people can also get like all these secondary problems. So if you look at the blood sugar issue, basically you can get insulin resistance, or some people call this type 2 diabetes.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily go as far as calling it diabetes. Let's call it insulin resistance.
That's a term I'm familiar with, yes.
So basically, it just means that the sugar can't get into your blood cells. The reason why this happens, in my view, is basically because of the cortisol. Because we have this excessive cortisol, which is the stress hormone.
Right.
And over time, cortisol basically causes your cells to switch off. So it causes them the insulin receptors to switch off, and you get cortisol resistance. So you start getting problems with blood sugar regulation from that point of view.
Okay.
But what really exacerbates the problem is that when our blood sugar drops, the normal response is for the body to see that as a stressor
Right.
and say, oh, this is not good, this is a problem. It releases stress hormones, and the stress hormones raise the blood sugar. So this is normal and natural. But because, remember I said that instead of acting normal, the autonomic nervous system goes flip-flops from one extreme to the other, in my
Right.
view. Then instead of just putting out a normal, reasonable amount of stress hormone, it puts on way too much. And then what this causes, it actually causes your blood sugar to skyrocket. And then when your blood sugar causes skyrocket, it then has to do the opposite to arrest it. And so we're on this crazy roller coaster ride because we either have our foot full on the go on the pedal or full on the brake.
Right.
And
that's
the problem, and it's
that's not
exacerbated
healthy.
by these secondary problems.
Yes. Okay. So
So this is some of the stress due to bodily dysfunctions. So I guess what I would suggest is 4 main triggers. There's conscious and subconscious stress and concern about your illness and symptoms.
right.
Because you could appreciate that when you're sick, this is stressful. Like you said, I mean, life is stressful with having this illness. And over time, when people have it longer, they start to also be subconsciously stressed.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about. It's like a friend of you says, oh, yeah, we're going to a barbecue on Sunday. Do you want to come? And the first thing you do is your stomach lurches straight a little bit, and you think, oh, am I going to be able to go for that whole barbecue? Should I go? What are they going to have to eat? I'm going to have a sleep before I go. And all these things. This is very stressful.
Yes.
And sometimes it's even subconscious because you're not necessarily thinking about it, or you don't even realize you're thinking about it. So this
Yes.
can be a stressor on its own right. But far, probably the most powerful one is the bodily dysfunctions. There's very few things that will be a bigger stressor to your body than when your blood sugar drops beyond a certain level. Because if it were to allow your body to continue in blood sugar, you end up going in a coma.
Right.
So
Okay.
the body reacts very seriously to that. So when we have, and it's not just hypoglycemia, it's also problems like hormonal dysfunction that causes stress and gut dysfunction. And so or toxic exposure. See, a lot of the toxic things we have is because of the gut dysfunction that develops.
Okay.
Then you get basically
the leaky gut.
Leaky gut, that's right.
Yeah.
And that this is basically, again, caused by cortisol. Because too much cortisol in this over-stress response causes the gut not to work, which is why we get butterflies in our stomach. And why, there's some more colorful language. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but when people get scared, certain bodily reactions happen.
Yes. We
so,
can interpret that.
That's right. And so after a while, the gut starts to get inflamed and all this, and then it leaks in things that shouldn't go into your bloodstream.
Right.
And basically, you can start getting parasites. You can start getting candida. You can start getting all these problems.
So,
and all of this, again, is a stressor. So
is
all
there
of these
any,
things,
if I was to go to my doctor, and what kind of blood work would I ask to be done to determine whether or not, what stage I'm at, if that's all going on or not? I mean, I don't know if
you know what, I think I wouldn't worry about it too much because you know when it's going on.
Because you
And
feel like
so
crap.
You feel it, yeah. And look, I mean, if you're not having big bowel dysfunction, don't think about it, because otherwise you're starting to now do the first stressor. Remember the concern about the
Right.
symptoms.
Well, everything you
It's a
name,
vicious
I
cycle.
already have the secondary ones. You know, I'm there.
Yes.
So,
Most people do.
Right.
Most people do. But what I'm saying is, get some help, get some treatment, but don't stress about it or focus on it too much, because as things normalize, the body heals itself as well.
that part I definitely stuck with me, that our body has a need to be in a homeostasis state. It wants to be back to healthy.
That's
It's doing
right.
what it can. And we live in a very crazy time where there's so many stressors going around us with our cell phones, and we're, just there's too much activity to get involved in, between
Look, what you say is so true, and it's about lifestyle, and we're so far away from a natural lifestyle
Ugh,
that it's hard to know what's
our
natural.
bodies can hardly function in this kind of a society that we have. And I think the statistics are up. I've seen them as high as 8% of the population in the world um, suffers from this disorder. I've seen 6, and it's all over the scale, but I've seen it at 8. You've got to say there's something major going wrong by the way we live our lives, you know?
You're right. People are so worried about so many things and stressed out. They don't even realize how stressed out they are.
I think you're right.
And also, the fact that you are talking to me right now is highly unnatural, because you should be asleep. Because when it goes dark, you can't see anything. And
Right.
Your body was, over many years was, electricity and all this stuff. It's all very recent.
Right. The past 100, 200 years, which is nothing.
Absolutely, and so we live a very unnatural and very stressful life in our modern lifestyle, and all
Yes.
of this contributes to the stress. And then what happens is something comes along, like you get like a toxic exposure from a pesticide or whatever, and your body suddenly goes boom, too much, and then it starts doing this crazy stuff.
Like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to say.
That's right.
And then
so,
it's just and then actually it does pull us out of the society, the mainstream of living in the stress. We're sick in bed. And our body has a way of pulling us out of it. It shuts us down. Not that that's what we want, but it's kind of an interesting to look at.
Yeah. Look, that's very insightful, Laura. I mean, that you could easily argue, and I mean, I don't want anyone to be offended by it. Obviously, it's terrible, this illness, and it's not a good thing.
No.
But one could make the argument that from the body's point of view, it is actually just trying very valiantly to deal with this stress. And unfortunately, what happens is when this dysfunction occurs, it actually creates the stress, because it creates all these bodily dysfunctions which cause stress. It creates mental stress because you can't live your life. And then what happens is as the dysfunction occurs, everything becomes exaggerated.
Yes.
So even like mental and emotional stress starts to occur. So when you go into a busy shopping center or watch a movie with lots of explosions,
Right.
That would be awesome when you were well. But now you've got mental and emotional stress. And before that wasn't a mental emotional stress, but now it's mental emotional stress because your system is compromised and diminished.
And it's very different. So everything in our
Yeah.
lives is a challenge. So basically, it's kind of almost the going to the healing portion or recovery is almost common sense. But you were very clear in your book, very detailed about exercise. Do a little bit, not too much, and I was very excited to see how specific you got about the certain foods. And just to let you know, we're down to our last couple of minutes, but I just
Yes.
wanted to throw a couple things out there to let people know that it's going to be common sense to find your way out of this disorder and just relax, meditate. The key word we hear is stress. We need to do what we can to breathe and relax, to let the stress, to learn at handling our stress better. And what would you like to share in your closing last 2 minutes here?
Okay, look, Laura, I guess two things. Just I saw you mention meditation, and some people might arc up, and I'll tell you, I was not keen to do this myself. I just want to point out that Harvard University has done research to show how even in a period of, I think it was 6 to 8 weeks, physical changes happen in the brain structure. So the impact, if you want to affect the nervous system, something like meditation can be very, very powerful. I'm not saying it's the only solution or the whole thing.
It's
but
one good one.
It is a very important part. And identifying your personal triggers. If you have an abusive husband who's beating you up, you can eat all the vitamins, do all the meditation and all the other stuff. It's not going to work.
Get it out of there.
You need to deal with other triggers. These are the type of triggers. There are
I
other
see.
mental, emotional triggers. They could be now. They could be from the past.
I
If
see.
you remember you were abused as a child, and this is still with you. This could be triggering.
That is
triggering your
making more
illness.
sense to me. I,
Not when you were healthy. When you were healthy, it was fine.
Right.
Well, it might have been upsetting, but it was fine. But now that it's not working properly, those things will perpetuate the illness.
Absolutely. I got to get a lot of stressors out of my life. I just got to take
This
them out.
is what I was talking about, specific triggers that you have to find for yourself. Because,
Thank you.
like I said, if you have something like that going on, then, and
They're stressors,
you
really.
need to address it. That's
Yeah.
right. And the physical stuff, you need to address that too. So it's about getting a good overview of what's going on, getting confidence. And I guess my biggest message to people is that recovery is possible.
Yes.
I'm not the only person. I have met I've met other people who have this. I know that there's many people who recover from this illness. It's just they don't run around on the internet and tell everyone about it. They get
Right.
on with their
Okay.
lives.
And look how far
And-
I had to go to find somebody to bring it to, I don't know how many thousands of miles apart we are, but I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that you found me and that we could share this
Yeah.
information through this venue.
Look, absolutely, Laura. And the point is that people they're often afraid that if they just talk about it, that it might come back.
Yes,
You
right.
know? And they and also there's such a stigma to the illness because some people suggest that it's all in your head.
Uh-huh,
And please
that's
excuse the
correct.
pun because obviously I'm suggesting that it is a dysfunction of the nervous system. So in a way it is in your head, but it's not, it's not in your head in that way.
Just put
You
it
know what I
away.
mean?
Don't look for it.
So
Move on.
my point is, don't lose hope. That was the mistake I made because I had basically given up until things got so bad. Don't lose hope. Recovery is possible. It's just that there isn't a magic cure. But I'm hoping that if people read my book, they can have a look at the video explanation for free.
Yep. That's
which
very
is
interesting.
About 40 minutes. So perhaps if they found it a little bit confusing what I was saying here, they can listen to that and they can listen to it again, see what they think. They can get my book on Amazon if they want it. It's been free. I've been giving it away for free, I think, for another few hours.
Yes, I think till the end of today. Yes.
Yeah,
And
so
can
for
you
3
the full
days
name?
I was able. Amazon was nice enough to let me give it away for free. So I've been trying to get into the hands of as many people as possible.
It's CFS Unraveled, and then there's another.
.com.
And what's the underline? There's another statement of the book. There's
The title of the book is CFS Unraveled: One Man's Search for the Cause of Chronic Fatigue Syndrome and Fibromyalgia,
that's right.
and the discovery essential for you to recover.
I couldn't get that last part in yet, but and they can search it through your name, which it all should be up there. How do you say your last name?
It's pronounced Neufer.
Neufer.
Neufer. Look, I mean, the best thing is probably just to Google CFS for chronic fatigue syndrome, although perhaps in hindsight, given the fact that fibromyalgia seems to be a term much more used, I should have called it fibromyalgia unraveled. But
It's all relative
basically-
where you live.
Yeah, it's CFS Unraveled, and I actually spell Unraveled with 2 L's. That's the
Okay,
way.
and I will put on my link because this will go into my past shows, and I'll put your information there so people who watch it tomorrow will have access to all your information and links as well. So I just want to thank you for your time. I know it's the middle of lunchtime for you right now, and for taking your time out to share all this great information with us. It's been extraordinary.
You're welcome, Laura. Thank you for having me on, and I have to say it's been very exciting to get all the lovely feedback from people, and I truly hope that my hard work was worth it and that
Oh,
people
yes.
can make some progress.
And maybe I can check back in 6 months and give you some feedback on how our group is doing, the people that are in, our fibromyalgia group, and just touch
Yeah.
base and see how it's going. Maybe have you back and
Absolutely,
see what's
absolutely.
up.
Look, and one of the things and look, if there's anyone listening to who's recovered, would you please consider contacting me via the website? I really like sharing recovery stories because
Yes.
all of this stuff all sounds like, you only have faith in what I'm telling you. No one can really believe it until they've got evidence. And funny, it's not until we really see it happening or experience it that we really truly believe in something.
Absolutely.
And-
Or somebody you
and-
know that has it.
Yeah.
All my
Yeah.
friends have CFS, so because they're the ones that understand why you're late or you have to cancel. My healthy friends kind of moved on, so or
Yeah.
I did. So
Yeah, look, you're right. That's what I mean. For me, I was completely convinced in the hypothesis and the idea, but I tell you what, I was not convinced that I was actually going to recover from it.
but you did.
I
You
did.
did.
That's right, and I think
Did.
people need to hear that because
Yes, we do.
because that's important. So if you have recovered, please don't be afraid to share your story, and if you do feel uncomfortable, then maybe we can share your story under a pseudonym or something like
Sure.
that.
And you have a
But
Facebook page?
I do prefer all the ones I've collected and shared so far. All people who've come out and share their own name and put a picture up, because I think that works the best way.
It is the best way to let people they can relate to that,
Yeah.
their stories. Well, thank you so much. You have a wonderful day, and thank you for all the gifts you've given to us with this knowledge.
Okay.
And
Thank you very much, Laura, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
yes, you
Take
too. Take care. Good night.
Cheers.
Or good
Bye-bye.
afternoon. And that's another show from Fibro Friends here in Tampa, Florida. Thanks for tuning in.